Hey everyone. Hopefully a long anticipated video here from some of my viewers, but I want to revisit double melee builds in relation to the latest patch. I was kind of unsure if I should wait because it looks like we're going to get another pretty large patch shortly, and I have a feeling it's basically the other half to this one. So I was going to set off on this, but I think that might as well make this now because I don't really know the release date of that anyway. So this video is going to take a look at some of the changes in the latest patch and how it's going to shift the priorities in your double melee builds, as well as talk about shields. And I want to kind of address how to basically take on shields, as I think they've been even further cemented into the meta. The PS shield did get a nerf, just not as much as I thought it would, and probably not as much as it needs, but I think you'll just start seeing a lot more shields in general, and so spending a bit of time talking about that will be at the end of the video. And we'll also talk about some of the nerfs that have affected double melee. So I think we'll start there. Let's talk about some of the nerfs first. So the Acellus got a nerf. This one is not too major to double melee, as we tend to pick our Zimmerman shots anyways, and so and more often than not, the Zimmerman just functions as a passive pressure tool, meaning that while you're melee lunging and canceling them and slinging around them, you're using the Zimmerman just to maintain the impact you've already built up, as well as if they're giving it to you, just letting you get a nice burst of 600 impact that will decay down to 360. It is mostly about the 620 burst impact, though. Whenever we land a charged pulse blade, for example, or any sort of strong hit, following up with a Zimmerman can oftentimes be the thing that pushes them over the edge and breaks their stagger. So the Acellus getting nerfed has hurt the double melee's ability to land the Zimmerman, but I would say overall this has actually been a buff to us, in that a lot of the threats that we used to face, like just quad lasers, quad bazookas, things that were just like an outright nuke 3 or 4 times, have become a little bit easier to dodge in close range, especially with the melee lunge sling, making your quick bursts or quick boosts more efficient. So overall, I'd say this one actually helped us, and awesome, that's great. Another change that affected melee was the Kakaku and the Flugel's relative positions here in melee lunging. So Flugel got a buff that I thought it needed. The melee lunge has been sped up to be pretty close to where the Kakaku is. Its main drawback is it's extremely energy inefficient in pretty much every way that matters for melee. So our melee lunges, it may not look like a lot, but though keep in mind that even pre-patch, the Kakaku was already too energy hungry in melee lunging, and I thought it was going to get a buff. I still think it will in the next patch. I think the ceiling is going to be lifted for melee lunge speed and melee attack EN consumption, and then hopefully the Kakaku will be further split from the Flugel in that way, and the Flugel will kind of stay where it is. But I do think that there is a place for the Flugel now. The lighter your mech, the more you can consider the Flugel. I think that if you are going to consider it, though, you want to be able to reach like over 330 boost speed. Like 340, I would say, is kind of the sweet spot where things start to make enough of a difference. But there is another advantage in addition to its just passive boost speed, which is going to be its upward thrust, and its QB reload is slightly faster, meaning that this booster can be a little bit more efficient at dodging pistols at close range because you boost a little bit faster and you boost a little bit further. When combined, especially, I think if you're going to run this booster, you really want to pick legs that have better jump distance than the HAL legs that I'm running now. I'll get to the legs in a second, but you can combine those features to make yourself, sort of like how the Nox could do previously, you can jump backwards a little bit faster and get out of effective range and ideal range of the pistols. So you can play a bit more of an evasive style with this. Just keep in mind your energy is going to be more expensive. You're not going to be able to rely on melee lunging as your like overwhelmingly exclusive form of movement. You are going to have to actually use that boost speed in order to have enough energy to use the lunge when you need it. So I still think the Kakaku has a place. The Flugel, you basically just need to run a lower weight, usually around 70,000. You could probably get away with like 71, 72, but you are trying to squeeze as much boost speed as you can out of those boosters, or out of this booster, and so I think it does behoove you to run even less than 72,000. I don't think this mech right now is fast enough with this booster, for example. The Kikaku is still hyper EN efficient, both in its AB EN consumption, so when you're actually already closed the gap, you're not really burning energy to stay there. The melee attack thrust is still a little too slow, but they both have places now. The Kikaku just needs a lift because it's not quite efficient enough. In a perfect world, if they do buff the Kikaku, I think you'll want to pair it with the Santai, and the Flugel you want to run with something that has just faster EN recharge delay and EN supply efficiency, so that you can have multiple iterations of spending your battery to try to get the gap closed and like to back up and then re-engage. Whereas a Kikaku will still be a much more high risk booster where you commit to trying to secure the combo with as big a capacity as possible. Sadly, until they buff the Kikaku, I think the Santai is hard to justify. So the heavier you are, it does make sense, but we'll jump into that next, actually, because they sort of tie into each other. So generators to consider. The Santai still is good, but the EN recharge delay, I cannot stress this enough, the nerf was huge. It has made it so that you can't realistically catch up to kites or lamb kites. That extra roughly quarter second, maybe not quarter, maybe call it like a tenth of a second, I think, has really given them the ability to get enough space to reset and stagger you before you can close the gap. So there was already issues with even last patch with the Kikaku speed relative to the Santai and in context to lightweights. This nerf has just further solidified it. I think it's very hard to justify the Santai now, because if you don't get the stagger in that in your EN capacity's first iteration, there's a good chance you're going to be taking a massive punish because you're going to be vulnerable for so long on the ground. Usually about almost 2 seconds, actually a little bit more than 2 seconds looking at that right now. So I think another thing that has happened in this patch is that there is a huge emphasis on not redlining your generators now. You really don't want to be taking that penalty. So the only time where you could previously do this in last patch, you could just commit to spending the whole battery to get the stagger, getting into your punish, and there would be a short enough EN recharge delay to get a little bit of battery to get you a quick boost cancel so that you could finish off your combos. Now that's out of the question. You really do need to be on top of your EN recharge delay and making sure you don't redline your generators. Generators to consider in lieu would probably be the Ming Tang versus the Hakoshi now. The Hakoshi comes with a little bit better EN capacity, and capacity is still king with generators overall. However, the EN recharge delay is a close second because it decides a lot of times whether or not you get the opportunity to get your battery back if you did redline fast enough to continue your combo. If the delay is too long, as it is with the Hakoshi, a lot of times they can slip out. So overall, I say I prefer the Ming Tang, just because getting that little bit of energy, quick boost, whether you have enough energy to do a full quick boost or not, doesn't matter. You still get the quick boost. You literally need 1 EN. So overall, I've preferred the Ming Tang. It's lighter weight, also helps a little bit, but both are still good. You can split the difference with the Hakoshi depending on how good you manage your energy. You might find it easier to use the Hakoshi. Just, again, make sure you're not redlining the generator. If they do buff the Kikaku, though, I think the Santai will become the new favorite again, so stand by for that. Let's talk about legs. So jump distance was always a huge thing that melee would have loved to have. It kind of decides your ability to get out of range of pistols, which you want to be able... You have to make a decision on your builds here. Are you going to go for just outright stability, which will make you more capable now of taking on some of the heavier builds, and also other double melee builds, or do you want to take more defense and have bigger jump distance? Like anything around the mid 130s to 40s is good. Still try to prioritize stability as much as you can. So I think the Ephemera legs are really good. The Melander 3 legs stand out really good as well. Both have reasonable stability, but the jump distance will really help you. Especially if you're running the Flugel generator, you might find the Flugel booster, you might find you run the Melander 3s too. You'll notice that big drop in weight helps you with the boost speed, and the jump distance gives you the ability to quick boost out of pistol range, make them waste some of their magazine while you flit in and out of range, trying to both dodge some attacks and also make them shoot when you're out of effective range. So yeah, those legs also have good places, but if you're going to be going for double melee combos, those. I still think the Howlegs have a place with their higher stability. That difference between over 1800 and under is quite noticeable, particularly against double Zimmerman builds. So yeah, I do think that all these legs are now viable. You're really just picking your compromises and which matchups you want to be stronger against. So depending on the meta and how that evolves, maybe you can shift in between those two. The Howlegs still can jump out of pistol range. It's just not so much if they're at point blank. So you basically just need a bit of space. Try to stay on the ground when you're against pistols as much as possible so you get that extra distance with each quick boost. As for arms, so they did help a lot of arms with melee damage. Overall, I think this was roughly a nerf to double melee, but a buff to lightweight melee punish builds. Now, I don't consider melee punish builds melee builds. I think they're just pistol builds or SMG builds that happen to punish with a melee weapon. That said, I do think that the VP46S arms are really great. They've got better stats in terms of firearm specialization, so this is going to help you with the Zimmerman. You can drop down to these arms to get even more firearm specialization, but you're giving up a lot of stats. And remember that melee does need to be in the middle in terms of tankiness. Otherwise, you just won't have enough health to take on the heavy bipeds and or the tanks. So if you want your build to be flexible, I still think prioritizing stats is a huge concern. Let's compare these to the Basho arms now. So you'll notice that we got better energy defense. That's one of the main reasons that I like these. They've allowed us to handle laser builds a lot better. So that's just a great sort of change. We do need firearm specialization overall with the Zimmerman for lightweight, so that's kind of why I'm not running Basho arms as often in my builds. The damage trade-off isn't huge, and especially with the fact that the laser blade got buffed in damage, it's a compromise I'm willing to make. So yeah, I do think those arms are just outright better all-rounders, especially with the Ocellus nerf. And also the energy defense is really great. Usually you don't, the time to kill hasn't really been brought down for most builds. There might be a couple of niche ones where that extra 10% of damage might have made the difference, but I don't think it's realistically going to affect you anymore. So these are my new favorite arms as a generalist, unless my build is trying to run the Flugel and trying to run light, in which case I might consider the ones just below here, the VP46Ds. Okay, so that covers the arms. The other major change, I think, that that has basically solidified the choice here, the right back weapon. I used to run either javelins or Huxleys. I think the Huxley now is essentially the best choice for double melee builds. So why is that? Well, because the Santai nerf has hurt our ability to chase kites as is, the Javelin Beta is just a little too unreliable now. More often than not, they're going to be able to get out of range of the Javelin now, and we won't have the opportunity to fire a second one anymore before we run out of energy. Before we run out of energy and cannot follow up and keep the distance close. We'll either get staggered or they'll get enough space now. So I think the Javelin Beta has just been somewhat rendered, especially with its recent nerf to tracking. That wasn't in this patch. I think it was in the patch before. But the Javelin Beta was already on the way out with that change, the tracking change, making it unreliable. I think they tackled this in the wrong way. I think they should have lowered the range of this missile to make it so that backpedaling kites and whatnot couldn't use it while kiting. I feel like this missile should be a rushdown missile where you use it when you're trying to get in close range and you have to fire it basically at the 200 to 150 meter mark out if you want it to stay in its effective range. But it should be super reliable. Sadly, they didn't go in that direction. So I think that taking the Huxley's benefits now are much more superior. So what does the Huxley help us do in particular on this build and also the Slicer? It allows us to prevent the laser weapons from decaying to their cumulative impact, because lasers tend to have great impact but horrible cumulative impact. So every time they decay down, you basically lost 80% of your impact buildup. Now with the Huxley up, as long as you don't get mini stun, you can keep that 1100 on the light lunge or that 1500 on the charged impact, making your follow-up Zimmerman very likely to stagger most builds. Even if it doesn't, you're going to have the opportunity to swap weapons then and go into a double pulse blade or vice versa. The point is that as long as the Huxley's not overheated yet, you have a great opportunity to finish off any builds and get them staggered by not having any of your impact decay down. This also goes for the Zimmerman too. The Zimmerman also has issues with decaying down to its accumulative impact, given the reload time is 2 seconds. So this is going to help you with kites. It's hard to catch up with kites, but if you can do it, the Zimmerman combined with the Huxley and one of your melee weapons is going to be enough impact to stagger them. So you'll have to make the most of that window once you close the gap, but now you will be able to do it reliably, whereas the missiles were less reliable. They could be dodged, and they could just not line up well in terms of when they were ready to shoot. The Huxley is extremely reliable, always there as long as you have picked your moment on when to activate it well. So yeah, I just think Huxley has outright replaced missiles now. What about shield users? Shields are always difficult for double melee, and I'll get into that when I get into the clips here of like some of the melee matches. But the Huxley still does a job, which is that every time they put down the shield, you can shoot them with the Zimmerman and have the Huxley building. Like once you've overheated it, the Huxley is going to still help you rush down the builds, especially the tankier ones, by making all of your weapons more efficient for impact buildup during that window. Keep in mind when the shields are like extremely fresh and not overheated, though, you might want to stall on using the Huxley too early, because they are likely going to block everything, which will convert it all to mitigated but still a cumulative impact anyways. So there is something to be said for not just activating the Huxley right at the start of the fight, and better to save it for once you've baited out at least 1 or 2 shield deploys, depending on the shield types. Okay, so I think that covers all of the new parts changes. Yeah, I think we'll just jump into some matches now, and then the very end here we'll talk about how to counter what will likely become just a further extension of more shield builds becoming more meta. So we're going to take a look at some like heavy biped elevator builds. These are still quite strong against melee. Like vertical elevator kites, I guess you'd call them, are taking advantage of melee's weakness, which is the poor tracking vertically that they have. And so the way to really counter these is to rely more on your Zimmerman and to try to score some kicks, because those just set up a light slash with either of your weapons. So yeah, basically you want to just focus on defense more against these types of builds, trying to evade big hits and trying to build up impact reliably with the Zimmerman, and setting up moments for a light slash as essentially like a freebie to get a big chunk of the way. Just keep in mind these are tough matchups, and so one other thing I might add is that it is preferable to have the Pulse Blade punish, as it's more reliable than the Charged Laser Blade, which does about the same amount of damage as the Pulse Blade now, but just because we're going to be very close to them when we stagger them, the Laser Blade is really not shining at close quarters punishes. It's much better if you can get them outside the 150 meter range. If you want to get that punish. And I'll talk about that in a couple of the other matches where I do use the Charged Laser Blade defensively, which is what it is really shining at. This little tech here, using the assault armor when they're extremely low health, like saving it and just getting the quick light slash in, you can squeeze that in before they deploy pulse armor most of the time. So keep in mind you have that in your back pocket as long as they're almost dead already. So this is an important skill, especially now with the Santai nerf, bodying your kites into the edge of the map before you start spending energy in order to chase them down. So you're just going to do this by focusing on dodging their missiles and ideally their attacks. Other weapons are harder though, like the Harris is very difficult to do this with, but the strategy is the same nonetheless. You're really trying to just pressure them backwards so that you can get them up into the air spending energy before you start to chase yourself, which we would just use Assault Boost for the most part in that case. The Laser Blade is honestly your favorite opening if you can, because it does basically the same amount of impact as a charged Laser Blade, charged Pulse Blade. as long as the Huxley's up. So that is preferable. And if you can stagger with that, you get the quicker and more reliable double pulse blade punish. I wouldn't get too wrapped up in focusing on that. It's just a point of note that if and when you can set it up, it's great now that you're going to be using the Huxley more often. But don't make that force you to do it. Like, the pulse blade is still a great initiator as well, and the punish on the pulse blade, or sorry, the laser blade's light slash is fine, especially against kites. For heavy bipeds, less so, and for tankier builds, you really do want to try to like stagger with the laser blade if you can. But a lot of times you'll be doing pulse blade, laser blade anyways to get them staggered, so it kind of works out that it doesn't really matter which one you initiate. You're really just trying to get the initiation under any cost. Here we'll take a look at another charged laser blade as a defensive tool, a great initiator, especially if you get the charge attack with the Huxley up, because it's basically 1500 impact buildup, which is even stronger than the pulse blade's double light slash. So if you have an opponent that you could kind of treat this like how the slicer used to be our parry option against initiations that we didn't win the trade. It doesn't have parry, it rather seeks to intercept, but the lance, for example, here has hit priority, but because we hit them with the mini stun, we both end up getting mini stunned out of our attacks, which is acceptable for us. We've closed the gap, and our pulse blade's still up. They've wasted their lance. The slicer, even though I don't use it as often, is still really strong, by the way, and the parry frames in particular are good against other melee builds and builds that kick. The laser blade is more flexible, but if you were using the laser blade pulse blade against the pulse blade slicer, you might be at a bit of a disadvantage because they can slice right through your mini stun of your charged laser blade, and you can't do anything about their parry frames. So realistically, you have to take advantage of their cooldown on the slicer instead and try to like dodge the charged slicer and make predictions or reads on that, and look to bait out the slicer instead and try to work around that cooling. All right, how to handle a lot of, you're going to see a lot of these double ducket builds. You have to exploit the range weaknesses of the pistols. Honestly, Etsugens are more annoying than pistols to me because of the range that they still have, even though it's like basically assault rifles. I feel like the SMG's got to be toned down a little bit, but in terms of range, and then let the assault rifles have a bit of that niche, add a little bit of a trade-off in net impact per second. But yeah, so with pistols, you're basically just trying to count the shots, trying to use the charged laser blade at range whenever you gap or create gaps by cubing backwards, which is what I'm doing here. I'm trying to bait out shots, waste their magazine, and once I've seen them spend like 6 shots, that's usually the time to just be willing to accept the next 2 salvos and go in for the kill. But the laser blade is also great for this because a lot of like these orbit kites tend to dodge your pulse blade initiation. The laser blade functions sort of like the opposite or the antithesis of the pulse blade, where you typically dodge through the pulse blade. If you try to do that against the laser blade's charge attack, it's going to sweep around and hit you, so you can keep them guessing on how to dodge. The best way to do the laser blade dodge, though, is to initiate with a light lunge, QB sling yourself to one side, ideally the one opposite the way they tend to go, so that you have as much space as possible, and then start the charged laser blade. That will fix a lot of the tracking issues with the laser blade, in that it tends to have issues if they're too close, because when they go up, that makes a faster change in angle of attack that you need to hit them at because you're so close. The further away they are, the less the angle changes, and so it makes the laser blade's hitbox more likely to hit them. But yeah, initiating with a light lunge and then canceling it off to the side into a charged attack is a great tool. You can also fake them out by just committing to the light lunge, which will be way too much impact for lightweights to accept for free. So that's how you handle pistols. Here we're going to be dealing with an SMG and build that's lightweight and tends to use verticality to kite. These are probably one of the more annoying lightweights to fight, and frankly what I would suggest against these builds is to conserve your energy, body them in, and use the Zimmerman more liberally. It's still worth it a lot of times to purge your laser blade here. I didn't in this match, but it is often worth it to purge it so you have access to the punch as like a last-ditch lunge after your pulse blade to get the stagger. The other tip, which I just did there, is don't worry about canceling their pulse armor, as they're going to drop anyways. Instead, just use your assault armor as your punish if it lines up that way. If it doesn't, then you can save it defensively if they have a melee weapon and try to punish you. If they don't have a melee weapon as a punish, then you may not find good opportunities to use your assault armor other than just as your freebie punish once you've staggered them. The other advantage of running the laser blade, though, is that when you do use the assault armor punish and you've used your pulse blade to close the gap and get the stagger, you have another lunge right after to continue the pressure and follow them up, so you don't have to give up all the space you fought so hard to get. Granted, a lot of times they'll pop the pulse armor, but that's often still worth it. Just hit him with a Zimmerman and another pulse blade as quickly as possible. You'll pick up the fight. You'll likely get staggered, but that's still better than having to start completely fresh and chase them down all over again when they have full energy again. So yeah, there is an advantage to keeping the laser blade. It's up to you and your playstyle about what you're more comfortable with. I do both. I think I'm pretty comfortable with both, and I tend to just pick the one that the opponent tends to give me better opportunities with. Like if they set me up for more punches, then I'll purge the laser blade. If they tend to play smart and keep the height disparity very strongly, I'll keep the laser blade. Another pistol match. I played this one a bit sloppy, but I still wanted to include it because it shows my mistakes, which is using the charge attacks too much. When you're against lightweights, don't get greedy for that big one stagger. The charge attacks are much easier to dodge for lightweights, so just focus on reliability. Use the light lunges, and here I get way too aggressive on the first round, and I don't try to bait out any of the rounds of the ducats yet. I just sort of let them get free hits on me. So yeah, it shows the difference between some of this and some of the other matches, but like how big of a difference baiting out some of the magazine can do for you. So let's talk about shields. I'll talk about techniques for how to defeat them shortly, but first I think the thing that you will have to do is understand each shield and its respective weaknesses so that you know how to tackle your opponent's build with your tools based on what tools they have at their disposal. So let's work in reverse order here just because there's the less to say about the lower ones. The Coral Shield is really not that spectacular. It doesn't have great defensive stats at all. So I don't think you're going to run into this too often. The main advantage of this one is that they can continue to fire their left weapon. So you'll often see this shield more like a passive shield that's just always up. The same strategy that it's going to apply for basically all shields still applies here, which is overwhelming aggression and trying to get out as many attacks in quick succession as possible, keeping the pressure up, forcing the shield to waste its deploys. The main weakness with this shield is its number of deploys. Yes, you can leave it up, and it's reasonably strong when it's in its non-IG, but they are still going to be trying to block nukes with that damage mitigation. So I would expect them to basically cycle this one as though it had a 1 second IG window, and it only gets 2 deploys plus 1 more if they're willing to overheat. So as long as you got a couple of nukes coming out in forcing out those deploys quickly, you shouldn't have too much trouble with this shield. You are going to have still respectable impact build up with it. The main thing you just want to focus on is dodging their nukes and not getting overly committed to your combos when you see that they've got something like an earshot or whatnot. You're going to want to make sure that you still have your wits about you and are ready to dodge their main nukes that they might try to fire out even though it puts down their shield. The Scudam, this thing is a major pain. Its main issue is just that it's so strong and it's likely going to be on tanky builds. The disadvantage is they can't dodge anything if they want to keep this shield up. So same strategy here. Just start slinging out all of your combos as quickly as possible. With the laser blade, I would recommend not using the charge attack though. Just take the light slash as it's faster, lets you switch back to the Zimmerman quicker, and keeps you more mobile. So that's one small change, is focus on your laser blade because they're never going to dodge it if they're running the Scudam, whereas in other builds they might. So and they might be using firing stance weapons if they were using the Scudam. So the main thing with this one is use the light lunges with your pulse blade and your laser blade, and keep the Zimmermans firing every time they're off reload. The Huxley, I would probably just deploy it on this one because it essentially is a race, so just go for it. And the other note for this one is once you've broken down the shield or forced them to do something like an expansion that makes them push down the shield, you need to have enough energy to follow up. So make sure you get your energy back right before this shield breaks and the stagger triggers on them, so that you can then swing really aggressively while they're still stuck in the IG frame there for 4 seconds trying to build up the shield. That is your moment to finish them off because they aren't going to be able to block that much for those 4 seconds. So try to have all your weapons off cooldown for that moment, and get your energy at least reasonably full before you break the shield outright. The SUTT, its main weakness here is deploy counts. Again, it's got a great IG window, so you're going to want to slow down your pulse blade double slashes. I would also recommend trying to set up an initiation with the laser blade first, as it's got better cooling, and the split up will force them to keep the shield up for both slashes. So yeah, the main issue with this shield is pacing your attacks to try to be just outside that 1.6 seconds of IG. So don't do the double slashes and the follow-up Zimmerman all at once. Try to delay your Zimmerman follow-ups just outside the window. It does still have decent impact dampening though in the non-IG. However, the damage is going to be bleeding through quite aggressively. So you can actually start to chip their health if you space your attacks just outside 1.6 seconds. So I'd recommend playing with that shield and watching for the color change so you can get the timing down and getting a feel for how to split your attacks up over 1.6 seconds. You actually want to be aggressive still, but you want to be at like an attack every 1.8 seconds essentially in order to defeat the shield. It will overheat quickly if you do that. It only has 2 deploys plus 1 for the overheat. So as long as you can force 3 deploys reasonably quickly, the cooling will not overcome the last bit left of heating left is only 40 points, and it costs 480. So you actually have quite a lot of time despite its cooling to try to force out that third deploy. PB Buckler, same issue. It just doesn't have enough deploys to handle your amount of offense. So the PB Buckler it will outright shut down some of your attacks. So all you got to do is, again, split up your attacks into their double swings rather than their single swings. You're going to want to avoid things like the charged pulse blade, and try to go for light slashes against shields as a general rule, but more so especially with this pulse buckler because it's very easy to overheat. This one I don't think you'll have too much trouble. The one thing to note is the buff to the IG duration was a little extreme, so pace your pulse blade slash as well, just slightly slower so you can get that second one in or outside the IG. The SU-R8, it has a lot of deploys. It's very difficult to use. I don't think you'll see this one too often, but it could be a very big threat to melee given they can block 80% so many times. This thing has just a crazy amount of deploys. The main weakness with this shield is just the damage mitigation outside of non-IG. Like, you can just out damage this shield. You won't be able to get the stagger so easily, but you're not necessarily looking to do that. You're looking to just chip about half their health so that when you finally do break down this shield, or even if you don't, if they just put it down and you just do an expansion swap with somebody where you counter them, they just won't have enough health to survive even one punish. So keep in mind they cannot deploy shields when pulse armor is up, meaning that you, as long as you set up your assault armor, you can still get the same effect. You can restagger them unless they're over 2,000 impact or stability, in which case you'll need the follow-up Zimmerman. The SU-Q5 is probably the strongest shield against melee, just because it is so easy to use and they're less likely to make mistakes. Again, the same weakness with this one is damage bleed through, so you do want to just keep up the aggression. Again, with the IG duration being 1 second, I think there is a justified argument for using occasionally the charged pulse blade and the charged laser blade here. They're going to parry the whole thing, but you are trying to make it so that if they are a little bit sloppy, you might be able to get the second hit just outside the IG window. Mix it up, though. The double slash is, with the pulse blade at least, is stronger than the charged pulse blade and has more impact. So even the mitigated stuff bleeding through will start to overwhelm the shield. Keep in mind, though, this one is very difficult to handle just because it's so generous with the IG and the impact dampening. I'm surprised they didn't nerf this one at the same time they did the PS. So as predicted, it's basically just going to replace the PS. Onto the PS shield. So they did nerf this one by 1 deploy count, meaning they can still parry 4 very efficiently, both in damage and impact. It has excellent cooling, meaning that it's very hard to overwhelm, and its damage and impact mitigation is quite strong. So again, I still think this shield's meta. I don't think they went far enough with the deploy heat buildup. It probably needs to have at least another 2 deploys removed to make this shield so that you have to factor in the cooling as one of its strengths. Right now, you don't even really have to. It's got 4 deploys and very unlikely to overwhelm it. On it, like if they're playing very careful. But our strategy is the same. Mix in the double pulse blade slashes, Zimmermans, and the charged laser blades double slashes. You want to have multi-slash attacks to force them to use 2 IGs, or like the 2 deploys, in order to block your attack. Because remember, if you do a double pulse blade, then a follow-up Zimmerman, then a double laser blade, that's basically 5 parries that they got to try to time, or they have to be willing to let one of them get through. Usually the Zimmerman, because the charged laser blade will have a mini stun on it, so they're not usually going to want to accept that. So same strategy, though. You need to overwhelm it by just getting very aggressive with your weapons. Let's talk about kicks. So kicks are a gamble. There's advantages if you throw them in, and there's a trade-off. Kicks do not make any of your weapons go on cooldown. They take hardly any energy, and they have a mini stun, which means that it's very devastating to take the kick if they don't parry it, which they should. But if they don't dodge it, if they parry it, you've wasted one of their shield deploys, and depending on the shield, that can be significant, it can be annoying, and if it's something like the SUQ or the R8, it's relatively marginal. Those are better for blocking kicks, so you aren't going to want to throw kicks into your combos very often against those shields. But for the PS, it is worth it, because you're basically taking 25% of their free deploys. However, the bad situation is when they dodge your kick and then they get a punish. So they just spend a little bit of energy and they get to punish you for whiffing your kick. So you should That's not to say that you shouldn't ever throw in kicks. It's just to tell you that you really need to be conservative with them and set them up so that they get into a rhythm where they think you're throwing more melee weapons, and you throw in kicks as basically freebies to buy you like a follow-up hit where their shield overheats one attack earlier. So I would usually throw in kicks after I've done some melee combos with both my weapons. But you can try. You got to keep them on their toes and guessing. You're really trying to look for opportunities where they set you up for a kick, either because they've whiffed one or they've done an attack that you've dodged, like a firing stance weapon that you've melee dodged into a kick, melee sling dodged into a kick. Those are situations where you want to throw in them. They're basically situations where they made a mistake, and you can throw in a kick rather than wasting one of your melee weapons and throwing it on cooldown. You can throw in a kick instead to force a deploy, or if they don't deploy, then do a kick into a Zimmerman, which is basically a free bit of impact build-up for you. Okay, so here we're up against an SUTT shield build with a melee punish and just passive impact build-up. So the longer the fight goes on in this case, the worse it is for me. The strategy here is to rapidly force the shield to get used up. The more time breathing room you give them, the more cooling they get on their shield. So let's minimize that. Again, I'm going to try to pace out my attacks, and I'm going to try to use the Zimmerman in between, just outside the IG window, to force them to waste another shield deploy or accept the impact build-up. And yeah, right now he's got it up, so I know that that's one. It's getting some cooling here, so I'm trying to use the Zimmerman here to pressure and force more free deploys. The charge attack forces an entire deploy, and we're ready to do the assault armor because they can't block it. When their pulse armor's up, you cannot use the shield. Here we're going to use a kick to stuff their pulse blade charge. Keep in mind, charged pulse blades are countered by kicks, so if your opponent is really aggressive with them, look for opportunities to get a free kick into Zimmerman punish as they grant them those opportunities to you. Kicks are risky, but depending on how well your opponent's responding to them and baiting them out, they are a gamble that can pay off as long as the opportunities are there. Obviously, I got a little too aggressive on that round with too many kicks and started to get red. I also failed to dodge some of the pulse blades too late. So you want to be able to dodge the pulse blade as well as a double melee player, which it's basically by dodging to the right and like at your 2 o'clock. Even better if you melee sling into the dodge, because then you'll get even more velocity and distance traveled. So this moment was interesting. Why didn't I counter the pulse armor? I have so much health as is here, and now I've basically got it in my back pocket. If they ever go for their melee punish, if they win the stagger, I'm going to have my assault armor forcing them to back off and give up the punish. Or I can actually reverse it and get the stagger if they commit to it, and then I get a punish. So basically it's like insurance. Now, even if I lose the stagger race, I still win, which is what happens here. So that is another strategy you can do with the shield, or sorry, with the assault armor, if you've got a commanding health lead and you can afford to take the first half of their punish. All right, this build, we're running into a PS shield user, so more deploys than the SUTT. Also has a LRB, so this build is looking to try to stall the fight by using the LRB to poke for continuous damage, the laser blade charge attack standing by as a defensive tool, and also the reverse joint kick. So the best way to tackle a build like this would be to exploit a sharp angle up or down and create height disparity for the approach so they don't have access to the kick, and the charged laser blade is easier to dodge if you've got height differences. Again, but because there is a shield there, we're trying to work in as much aggression as possible. Shields, everything, just back to that.